Welcome to the show, everybody. Sorry we were a little late. We were just getting situated between. I do online interviews, so we try to do the best we can. And here we are. We're officially live, and I just want to welcome Robert. Thank you for joining me. This is Robert Breedlove. Welcome to the show.
What's up, Adam? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's definitely a pleasure to have you. Would you like to, give a little, introduction to yourself? Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. My
Okay.
name is Robert Breedlove. I am the founder, CEO, and CIO for Parallax Digital. We are a multi-strategy crypto asset hedge fund. So we handle investments in the crypto asset universe. We also do some consulting in the space. And my background is I have a master's degree in accounting and finance, and I was a CPA for a number of years. And had more or less been a career CFO before starting Parallax back in 2017.
Okay.
And I guess the real long short of how this has become my life's work, I consider Bitcoin really to be my life's work, is that after being involved in this space for a number of years, and I like to say where it started out as a hobbyist investment, and I like to say where my money went, my mind followed. And I've spent the past few years tumbling down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Which for people that may not know what that is, it really starts with that question, what is money?
Okay.
You start to crack these philosophical depths, and it's a long and winding question, and it still gives me new answers all the time. So Bitcoin being this kind of a first principles disruption to money, it actually acts as somewhat of an inexhaustible teacher, in that it just makes you ask these very fundamental questions about money, about society, about morality. And I've been writing about it. I've always been an avid reader, but falling into Bitcoin has given me the impetus to start writing. Yeah. And people have enjoyed it. So I'm going to keep doing it. And that's why it's my life's work.
Interesting. Yeah, you make a good point too. It really does boil down to what is money, and how do you answer that question? Like, what is money? Like, even looking at a U.S. dollar bill, $10, $100 bill, whatever. What is it? It's really just a piece of paper. It's the philosophy behind it. What it actually means, that when you hand someone a $100 bill, that they're actually that they're the ones, we've put the value on that dollar. Interesting. I as you said, like, it really does seem like a really deep question, and probably the more you look into it, the more, answers are found that you need more answers to, actually, and more questions pop up. But I guess, I was going to say, I really would like to stick to what Bitcoin is, but you really kind of nailed it, though, because it is money. And then what is money?
Right.
So, man, I mean, I guess I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss, as far as like the crypto world goes. I just created a Bitcoin wallet on I think it's Coinbase. So I have a Bitcoin wallet. I don't know what to do with it. It's just like, I'm like, okay, now what do I do? And then, of course, you commented on my tweet when I was like, who knows anything about cryptocurrencies? Like, where do I even begin? Let's talk to someone. So what do you say to someone like me? I know absolutely nothing about it. What's the beginning? Like, how do you go about starting to just explain it even?
Sure. I think a lot of people get lost trying to explain Bitcoin from a technological or technical standpoint.
Okay.
A lot of people start to tell you about the blockchain and nonces and timestamps and public and private key cryptography, all these complex topics, and people gloss over very quickly. So, and that also doesn't encapsulate the implications of what it is, because it is a technological breakthrough, but to understand how the nature of the game is changing as a result of Bitcoin, you actually have to go deep into the past and understand what is money first, right?
Right.
And if you ask a standard economist, the textbook answer they'll give you to that question, what is money, is it's a medium of exchange. And what this means is that anytime every society becomes more productive through trade, right? We all know, we learned this in Econ 101. It's the comparative advantage. If you make hats faster than I make boots, then you and I are both better off by specializing in hats and boots respectively and trading.
Right.
Right. We actually gain time. So it's through trade and through innovation that we create time savings, right? We accomplish greater results with less efforts.
Yeah.
And in any trading network or any society, the most tradable thing or the most liquid asset is money by definition. It's actually that simple.
Okay.
And what, money has taken many forms throughout history. It's been salt, it's been seashells, it's been cattle, it's been government paper like we use today.
Yeah.
But so we can monetize many different things, but the free market tends to naturally select a money that exhibits 5 critical properties. And those properties are divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, and scarcity. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over a little bit of history, but hopefully the point still lands.
Okay.
We've experimented with many different things as money, as I've said, seashells, salt, all these other things. The market determined that the monetary metals, so I'm talking about gold and silver predominantly, were the best technologies or tools at fulfilling the first 4 properties of money, right? Metal's relatively divisible, like we can break it down into coins or we can recombine it into bars. It's very durable, right? Especially gold, like it's non-corrosive. It doesn't break down over time. Metals are somewhat portable, although they're heavy, so they're expensive to safeguard and move around. Yeah. And then they're also fairly recognizable. Like you can kind of know gold when you see it, and there are techniques to verify its authenticity. So metals were basically selected as money over time. And of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce. And that's what gives gold its outsized value relative to everything else in the world.
Just because it's less found. It's found less in nature, I guess.
Exactly right. It has the naturally highest scarcity profile. And another way to think about this is even the word economics, it means to economize, right? So to do more with less, or to accomplish more in less time.
Okay.
And the economy itself, you can think of as, if you thought of the world as a collective organism,
okay,
we're actually becoming more energy efficient or productive, again, through trade and innovation, right? So we're trading our time effectively, okay, right? When you sell me a hat or boots, it's actually the time you spent creating that, the time and energy you spent creating that. That's what you're trading me. And I'm doing the same when I trade with you. So money as being the most tradable thing, markets naturally coalesce around the asset that is the most scarce, because time is absolutely scarce, right? That's the one thing we cannot create any more of.
Right.
Right. We're all just experiencing time kind of in the same field. And so in that sense, the scarcity of gold made it the best means of tokenizing time, essentially. So no matter how much energy and time we spent towards producing gold, its supply increased the least. So if you chose to part, I would be inflated slowly and reliably.
You cut out on that one sentence. Please repeat that.
Sorry about that. I was saying if you chose to store your wealth in gold, we knew historically that the supply of gold, no matter how much anyone tried to increase its supply, would only increase about 2% per year. So you knew, as someone storing your wealth in gold, it was only going to be diluted at about 2% per year.
Right.
And no one could change that
from inflation.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's another way of saying it is gold was the most inflation resistant metal. And that's why it became money, right?
Okay.
Now the dollars that we use today, they were once redeemable for gold, right?
Right.
So what it was in the beginning was a warehouse receipt. So you would take your gold to a warehouse, put it on deposit. They would give you paper redeemable for gold. And then you could transact in that paper. And before long, people were using that paper as if it were gold because it could be redeemed for gold, right?
Right. And it was lighter and easier to carry around.
Exactly right. It was introduced to resolve the portability and divisibility shortcomings of gold.
Right, carrying around the
Right.
weight of it and all that.
Exactly. So it was basically, and this is coins and paper, they were basically satisfying a certification function such that every time you and I traded, I didn't need to stop and verify the weight of the gold or the fineness or the authenticity. I could trust the stamp, right? I either
Right.
trusted the stamp that was redeemable for gold or the stamp on the coin that said it weighed 0.5 ounces or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how we got government money. And then over time, that redeemability was essentially revoked, culminating
Jekyll's
in the
Island.
19. That's right. It started at Jekyll's Island with the inception of the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
And by the time, again, glossing over a lot of history, but to get to the point, we get to 1971. The United States had rewritten the rules of the established economic order after World War II because we held the most gold, right?
Okay.
So if you think about whoever controls the money, what is the Rothschilds quote? Give me the power to control a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws, right?
Scary. But
So when the
okay.
United States controlled most of the gold in the world, we stepped in and rewrote the rules of banking at the Bretton Woods Conference. And
Okay.
we said that every currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be pegged to gold. So this gave the United States the ability to essentially control the global economic order, and it made the Fed the central bank of the earth, effectively.
Wow, okay.
Now, that system was honored up until 1971. There were more and more countries repatriating their gold, so they were demanding their gold be shipped back from the United States. And when Germany tried to repatriate some of their gold, that was the last straw. And that's when the notorious Nixon shock took place. And he took us off of the gold standard. He said that dollars would no longer be redeemable for gold. It was said to be a temporary measure, but of course it's been permanent. And we're now deep into this uncharted territory called fiat currency.
Yeah.
That we have now monetized government debt. That's what we use. And this debt that's monetized is undergoing a slow motion default, right? Every country can just, well, specifically the United States can just print dollars, send them around the world, and the world sends them stuff because the dollar is the international reserve currency.
Okay.
It is not, we've gotten away from the free market, right? The free market selected a money that was divisible, durable, portable, recognizable, and scarce. That was gold. We augmented gold with paper to try and make it better. We then revoked redeemability of that paper for gold, which totally compromised the scarcity of money. And since 1971, debts have exploded. Debt to GDP is through the roof. Bank failures are rampant. The boom and bust cycle has become more severe than ever. And there's actually a lot of other consequences, that socioeconomic consequences, like divorce rates are up, suicide rates are up, drug abuse, all these things. I'd encourage the listeners to check out the website WTF 1971, or I'm sorry, WTF happened in 1971.com.
Okay.
And it just goes through all this data that shows the, supposed impacts. Yeah, since 1971. And
we've just been, and it's like we've just been continuing on acting as if, everything's still the same, spending money, treating money that it still has that same kind of guarantee that it's worth something. You look at the dollar bill and they're like, yeah, it's worth $1. But you think about what $1 was worth in 1940 versus now, it was significantly more valuable back then. And now it's worth less and less and less. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
That's right. And that's exactly the opposite.
Go ahead.
What would happen under a gold standard? Because again, the gold supply would be increasing at, say, 2% a year.
Right.
Whereas any other section or area of the economy where we get smarter or better at making things, the prices would come down, right? So if you can, and you see this in electronics, right? The price of a big screen TV tends to go down really fast because our tech gets much better. So prices decline. But in an unfree market or a monopolized market for money like we have, prices increasing is actually a measure of how much the governments are stealing from you, because they're printing new money, distributing it to themselves first. They get to spend it when it's at maximal value. And then as it diffuses deeper into the world economy, it loses value, becomes diluted.
Right.
Right. So the people The most economically vulnerable among us, like retirees, pensioners, the poor that are storing most of their wealth in fiat currency, are actually victimized most by this system. So it's quite literally an anti-Robin Hood system. It's stealing from the poor and giving to the rich.
Dang.
And this is at the heart of so many ails in the world, socioeconomic. And as I argue in some of my writing, it actually is corruptive to our morality.
Oh. How so? Just curious what your like how did you get to that? I mean, I could kind of get a gist of it, but I want your view on it.
Sure. So in my writing, I give the example of, it's a parable of a winemaker. And I got this from a great book called Honest Money by Gary North. And it's available as a free PDF online. And he's explaining banking and economics through a Christian perspective, but you can read it with a secular lens. He's just explaining economics from first principles, but then he quotes some Bible verses along the way. So don't let that scare you off. But essentially, if a winemaker is operating an essentially banked economy, say he's been selling his wine for $20 a bottle historically, and he knows all of a sudden that the central bank just doubled the money supply. So he's now faced with a dilemma because he's facing inflation, right? So all of the cost of his inputs are going to go up, the cost of his labor, et cetera. So his first option, and just for simplicity's sake, central bank doubled the money supply, so he knows there's going to be about 50% inflation once it fully flushes through, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he can either keep selling his wine for $20 a bottle in post-inflation dollars, and he'll take a 50% haircut, right? Because all of his cost of inputs will go up 50%, but his price stays the same, so he'll eat that loss. His second option is he can try and cut cost in his wine. He can use cheaper ingredients, or he can water it down, and then he could keep selling it for $20, right? So he's actually selling an inferior product at the same price to maintain his margin, if that makes sense.
Of course.
And then his third option would be to just be true to inflation, double the selling price to $40 and maintain your margin exactly as it was.
Yeah.
So in the marketplace, price changes are the most visible thing, right? So if I increase a price, I'm inducing a customer to look elsewhere, to look at my competition, clearly, right? Yeah. If my wine jumps from $20 to $30, my customers are going to look elsewhere, at least some of them. Also, the reverse is true. If I decrease prices, I'm actually inducing customers in most markets to look at my product, right? Yeah. To consider buying my product at the expense of my competitors. So even if the winemaker chooses to be honest and hold true to his scruples and sell it for $40, he's going to face competition from guys that would instead keep it at $20 and maybe just water it down a little bit, or maybe just use a few cheaper ingredients, just tweak it at the edges, right? Yeah. And so even if he's an honest winemaker operating in a centrally banked economy, he faces competition from people that are being dishonest. So it forces him to weigh his moral integrity against his financial well-being. There's a big financial incentive to deceive your customers in the short run when inflation strikes. Yeah. And this is that little kernel, and it radiates outward from there, right? Because anyone else that gets less value for their money then has an incentive to do that to their customers.
And so yeah, and you're only talking about
so argue, and you can check out. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so it could
this
be
would be applicable
to anything.
To anything.
Yep, exactly.
That's right.
Interesting.
And the piece I wrote on that's called "Masters and Slaves of Money." It goes deeper into that, and then it draws on that example from Gary North and Honest Money.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, but another way to think about it would be, it's important to understand it this way: inflating the money supply artificially. Yeah. We've been led to believe that it has stimulative effects on an economy, or that it's healthy or good. It's purely a mechanism for redistributing wealth from one group to another. Yeah. Whoever can get the new money first benefits at the expense of everyone else. And that's
now
just
new money. Sorry I'm just curious, yeah. Like so now that would be cryptocurrency. I'm assuming that would be the new money Or is that was I correct to assume that, or
Yeah. So what Bitcoin represents in this
okay,
picture
yeah,
is, I guess the first takeaway from all of that is to understand that the world still operates on a gold standard. Now, that
okay,
doesn't mean you and I can go and redeem our dollars for gold.
yeah,
We're actually operating under an economic tyranny of central banking. They don't give us that privilege. But nations, when they settle with one another, like when things really get hot, especially in wartime, they demand to be settled in gold, right?
okay,
A nation's not going to just hold dollars and trust the US that they won't print it, right? They'll do it in peace times a
right,
little bit, but central banks hold gold. Gold is the prime monetary layer of the earth.
okay,
It's been that way for 5,000 years. It's a tool so old that we forgot why it's valuable, right? If you
interesting,
ask most people about gold, they're not going to name the 5 properties of money. And it's been heavily obscured under government controlled curriculum, right? We don't talk about Austrian economics. We don't talk about what is money. The standard lesson in school is that government controls money, and that's it. That's just the way it is. But
yeah,
that's not actually the way it is. And where Bitcoin comes into the picture is that it is a first principles disruption to gold. So we have this entire financial system. It's very complicated, very convoluted, but at its base layer is gold. And it's gold is money because it was the most divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, and scarce asset.
right,
And now we introduce Bitcoin, which is effectively combined. One way to think about it is combining all of the economic properties of the internet or digital technology with the economic properties of gold.
hmm,
So because Bitcoin is just information, it's essentially infinitely divisible. You can subdivide it and recombine it at virtually no cost. It's stored in a distributed fashion, right? Everyone has a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain. Everyone that's running a node all over the planet, or running a mining operation, they're actually maintaining a record of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's said to be everywhere and nowhere, which gives it like infinite durability.
okay,
Bitcoin is very portable because it's digital. You can send it around the world at the speed of light. So a lot of people call it like gold with wings.
okay,
And then Bitcoin's very recognizable, meaning that you can't counterfeit it. So instead of having to trust a financial institution that tells me what balance I have, I can verify my balance with my computer or software. And then lastly, and very importantly, and this property is what's so disruptive to gold, Bitcoin represents the discovery of absolute scarcity. We've never had an asset in human history that we knew with perfect certainty what its total supply is and ever would be. So we know
huh.
that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin
Oh, it's a
ever.
finite amount.
Strictly finite and
Interesting.
unchangeable. We've never had, I like to
Really?
say it like this. The old adage, there's 2 certainties in life, death and
Yeah.
taxes.
Yeah.
Bitcoin gives us our 3rd certainty, which is
Wow.
21 million.
Why
And,
is that?
and I'm sorry, you said, why is that?
Yeah, like I don't get it. What is it? So you've mentioned now the Bitcoin blockchain,
Mhm.
um, now, and that there's a finite amount. So and I know a little bit about it. But as I said, I'm looking out into the abyss of
Mhm.
unknowing essentially. So is it what is it? Is it a code that has a certain amount of uh, you know combinations that eventually reaches 21, would you say 21 million?
21 million, that's right.
Huh.
So the money supply of Bitcoin 21 million
Yeah.
was basically set in mathematical stone when Satoshi launched the Genesis block. So Bitcoin is open source software. Things about it can be changed, but you can't change the supply. Now, you could, in theory, if you could convince everyone in the world that they needed to be stolen from by inflation and that we needed a 2% inflation rate introduced to Bitcoin. But the political dynamic is such that all you have to do is follow the existing rule set, and it's optimized for you as a holder. you know there's 0% inflation. So another way to think about it is if you could choose between three different forms of money, one has 10% tax, one has 5% tax annual, and one has 0%. Which one would you choose?
0%.
Everyone chooses 0% because you
Right.
know that your money is going to hold maximal value and no one can steal from you, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin has optimized all properties of money. It's the only asset in history with absolute 0% unexpected inflation. We know
Yeah.
it's fully diluted amount for good.
And it's only going up in value then because of that fact.
And that's right. So as other things become less scarce relative to Bitcoin, Bitcoin becomes more expensive, specifically US dollars. Most people are thinking the US dollar price of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
As the supply of dollars increases further, which we could get into more of that, but basically, central banking is designed in such a way that it's increasing debt burdens, and those debt burdens require exponentially more dollars to service them to keep the entire system stable. So dollars on a chart are just doing a full exponential hockey stick up. Bitcoin's doing the opposite. It's leveling off, right?
Okay.
And if we conceive that distance between the Bitcoin supply curve and the US dollar supply curve, as that distance increases, that's a more expensive Bitcoin in US dollar terms. So it's more dollars chasing less Bitcoin. And that's what's got the world so captivated every time it does one of these boom cycles.
Yeah.
Um,
Bitcoin millionaires. They're all over the place now.
yeah.
It used to be nothing. Well, explain then, like, what is the difference between, I know there's Bitcoin, but then there's this long list of all these different cryptocurrencies. What is the difference there then? Are they also Bitcoin, or is it a different type of Bitcoin? What is that?
So I like to explain that there's two hemispheres to the universe, basically. In one
Okay.
hemisphere, we have Bitcoin, which is more like the internet itself. So the internet was built in a stack of open source protocols, some of which surely you've heard of: HTTP, TCP/IP.
Yeah.
And these open source software protocols are used for moving information without permission. So we can set up a website, we can have a Zoom call, we can do all these things. We can build in this realm, right? Because these things are open source. And in this, you can conceive of Bitcoin as the latest layer of the internet protocol suite, which is just an open source protocol for moving value. So it's built on top of this existing internet infrastructure.
Yeah.
Whereas everything else, the alternative crypto assets, some people endearingly call them shit coins, they have copied, because Bitcoin is open source, they've copied the software of Bitcoin and changed it either significantly or just at the margins. And they're using it to either try and compete with Bitcoin directly as money or to address other markets. Like Ethereum is the second most popular one. It's basically competing with Amazon Web Services. So they're trying to give you a distributed computing platform.
Okay.
And the reason there's such a difference between the two is because, again, Bitcoin has already perfected the properties of money. There's nowhere to get 10x better than Bitcoin. And a lot of people try to focus on transactions per second. They say Bitcoin's slow, it takes a lot of energy, but that slowness and energy is what gives Bitcoin settlement assurances. So if I send you Bitcoin and we wait an hour and there's 6 blocks on top, one in the world can fight to a gold coin.
Sorry, Robert, you cut out a little bit there. So if you sent me some Bitcoin, then what would happen?
So if I send you some Bitcoin, it's as if I flipped you a gold coin, right? No one in the world can reverse that transaction. And it gives its users maximum sovereignty. So you don't need any permission. You don't need PayPal to authorize your transaction. You don't need a central bank to verify it. It's literally peer-to-peer. So it gives people a mechanism to store their wealth in a medium that cannot be inflated, cannot be stopped, can't even be interrupted.
Oh, okay.
And everything else.
So what I'm hearing is people basically regaining control of the global monetary system, saying it's ours now. Like we And it's so funny, you think about, even just look at what the mainstream media is they're scrambling because they don't control the news narrative anymore. The internet itself is a free flow of information that they can't stop. We now we can look it up. We can watch what actually happened, listening to the narrative. So now applying that to what cryptocurrency is, it feels like I'm getting a picture now. It kind of it's us regaining control in a different fashion, in a monetary fashion, essentially. Interesting.
I think that's absolutely correct. And to echo that sentiment a bit, I consider the digital age that we're in some kind of renaissance, right? It's hard to see how significant it's going to be when we're in the middle of it.
Right.
But to your point, anachronistic institutions, media, they're all scrambling to try and adapt to this new world. And people like yourself and, the intellectual dark web and all these other things are just running circles around them because they've adapted this technology that's just faster, stronger, smarter in every way. And there's a way to look at this. In a free market, right? People buying and selling with their own self-interest in mind. The price that emerges from a free market is said to be truth. And what that means is that it's the consensus of the world, right? If gold is trading at $1,900 an ounce, that means everyone in the world has voted by buying or selling, and that's the price, right?
Yeah.
So that is truth, effectively, price. And the same can be said for innovation. So when a tool emerges on the free market, right, like this MacBook Pro that I've got, it tends to be whatever tool is successful in the marketplace is a form of truth in itself, and that it's the best way to satisfy a particular want based on mankind's current knowledge, right? We don't know a better way to build a computer than this thing I've got in front of me at scale, right? So we can kind of conceive of the digital age as being this accelerant to the truth-finding function of free markets. And the truth of money is that gold is money, right? But now, by introducing this new innovation, there's a truth below gold. And so I consider Bitcoin to be the latest and greatest test of the disruptive potential of digital technology. If digital tech can disrupt gold that's 5,000 years old, that's the biggest game in the room. If you can
that's
disrupt
actually
gold,
kind of what my question is. Can it disrupt gold? Is there going to be a point where gold is not going to be as scarce because suddenly people are like, I'm going to choose cryptocurrency instead because I'm going to, I don't need to go through this system that's worked for 5,000 years, but the internet wasn't around for 5,000 years. It's been around for 30 years. I mean, when did the internet get created? In the 80s, late 70s? I don't remember exactly, but
it's been mainstream for maybe 25, 30 years.
Right.
And to your point, today, so Bitcoin's inflation rate cuts in half every 4 years.
Okay.
So the way to quantify its scarcity, and this was popularized in a book that I recommend anyone that's interested in Bitcoin should read, The Bitcoin Standard. It's an excellent read. It paints the entire economic history of the world and introduces Bitcoin later on. The scarcity of Bitcoin today, as defined by the stock to flow ratio, is roughly 55, which is the same as gold, right? Gold has been the highest stock to flow asset we've had ever, again, with the greatest scarcity, and that's what made it money.
Yeah.
But every 4 years, Bitcoin's stock to flow ratio doubles.
Wow.
So in 2024, the algorithm will enforce a change in its supply schedule such that its stock to flow ratio goes to 110. And then in 2028, it goes to 220. And it keeps going until it reaches infinity. So that is the uncharted territory before us with gold. I was saying that's the uncharted territory before us with gold. And we could say that Bitcoin is currently disruptive to gold and that it's, the price of gold in Bitcoin terms has collapsed over the past 10 years. Bitcoin's the best performing asset in human history. Its returns are truly staggering. And if it continues doing that, then it will be, I think, the validation for the digital renaissance, or whatever you want to call it, that really big things are afoot, like tectonic social level changes are at hand as a result of the digital age.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's definitely gives me much more of an understanding. So what you're saying is buy Bitcoin. That's a,
it, it,
so I can walk away from this knowing I should get into Bitcoin a little bit, because if
I,
it doubles every 4 years, my goodness.
yeah, my first piece of advice is to always invest in education first. Clearly, like don't take my word for it. Don't
Yeah.
take anyone's word for it. Study wide, and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah.
But it's funny that the answer, like you go so deep down this rabbit hole, like what is money, what is government,
Right.
philosophy, like it touches all these things, but then the answer comes back to, yeah, just buy and hold Bitcoin. It's actually
Yeah.
very simple. And that strategy actually bears it out. The buy and hold Bitcoin strategy is extremely hard to outperform, even for professional hedge fund managers. There's very few that can do it.
Wow.
So that is the answer in a lot of ways.
So not only is it undercutting gold, it's undercutting almost the entire financial institutions that have been running rampant for many years now. You know, it's like you just said, even hedge funds, people, investments. If you get into Bitcoin, it sounds like a sure thing. I mean, what happens if a solar flare comes and an EMP, turns every electronic off for 10 seconds, only 10 seconds, and then everything comes back on? Is all that lost? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so Bitcoin would be okay in that situation,
Okay.
because essentially, again, back to its everywhere and nowhere qualities. There are
Yeah.
people that are backing up the entire blockchain to cold storage devices in real time, right? So it would be disruptive, but not permanently disruptive. And I actually think the legacy financial system would probably suffer more in the event of a global EMP,
Really?
because there's just not as much redundancy. It's a inherently fragile network
Okay.
where you have several interdependencies, but not a lot of redundancy under it. And Bitcoin's the opposite. Bitcoin's like pure redundancy, right? Every node is an entire copy of Bitcoin's history. So you could nuke 99.9% of the planet and Bitcoin would survive. I don't know that it would be useful after that necessarily.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who asked me to ask you about the Mona Lisa in the blockchain. I don't know
Mona
what that
Lisa?
even means. Do you know what that means?
I don't think I've heard of the Mona Lisa in the blockchain. I wonder if
No?
there are, I don't know specifically, but there are people that engage in what's called blockchain graffiti,
Okay.
where you can
And that's
actually,
actually the next thing he sent me, was this permanently preserve images on the blockchain, and then it's a picture of crypto graffiti. What's
yes.
that all
So
about?
any message you append to the blockchain. So to back up a little bit, the blockchain, a block is a group of transactions,
Okay.
right? And they're chained together in these blocks every 10 minutes. That's what the global mining network is updating that ledger. So it's a history of all Bitcoin transactions all the way back to the beginning, to the Genesis block.
Okay.
And if you write a message into that ledger, it becomes essentially permanent. No one can erase it, right? It's written on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is this form of indisputable truth, right? No one can argue with a Bitcoin blockchain. Whatever coin moved from one address to another, or what we call UTXOs, these are unspent transaction outputs, whoever owns those, that is the truth. Like you can't argue with it, you can't overturn it by law, you can't do anything.
Right.
So what people will do is write messages, and this is what Satoshi did actually. In the Genesis block, he encoded a newspaper
Hold on,
that was referring to,
Robert.
I think it said the chancellor's on. Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. You just go back to what he did. You started saying what he did when he created the Genesis block.
So Satoshi in the Genesis block, this is the original block for Bitcoin. He encoded a message from a newspaper headline that said the chancellor is on the verge of taking on a second bailout for the banks.
Okay.
So that was kind of the first block graffiti, is that Satoshi was making reference to a newspaper article. And a lot of people point to that as the underlying impetus for him for creating Bitcoin. It's like, we're tired of these bailouts, which are just a confiscation of wealth from society to enrich the politically favored few.
Yeah, to keep the system that is basically just taking stuff out of our pockets going,
Right.
instead of letting them just crumble and let us go back to having an actual standard that works.
Exactly.
Okay. Right. All right.
It's anti-Darwinian, right? We need, like, the part of capitalism is that businesses fail. When businesses fail, capital gets reallocated, and we learn. We learn that that business model didn't work. When you
Yes.
artificially pump in liquidity, you're keeping a zombie alive. People actually call them zombie companies. And you're stealing value from society to do that. So it's
Okay.
very distortive to the market.
Now, how does one even mine Bitcoin? So I just got a new computer. I don't have the top of the line GPU, but I have a fairly decent one. And actually, I was warned because I was looking at getting a fairly decent video card that you should look out because someone might have been using it for Bitcoin mining. And I was like, what do you mean? Like the graphics card? Like, okay. And then I looked into it a little bit and I learned that they basically run this. I don't know if it's a program nonstop for months on end, just mine. Well, so what is mining, Bitcoin?
Yeah, so Bitcoin mining is a global competition to maintain the ledger. So you're essentially casting ballots. These ballots are called hashes. So there are computers trying to solve a puzzle. Every attempted solution to that puzzle is cast, and these casting these ballots or these hashes cost energy, right? You have to install hardware and you have to consume electricity to try and solve this puzzle. And the winner of this global race, which is at the end of every block, so every 10 minutes there's a winner, wins the newly issued Bitcoin from the blockchain. And that is the energy and security network that secures Bitcoin. So Satoshi has basically designed the economic incentives such that there's a large energetic security race to try and mine the Bitcoin, but that energy allocation goes to securing its network. So that's what makes Bitcoin so hard to crack. It's the most secure computing network in human history. And it's more of a large scale commercial operation at this point. People used to mine on their own computers, but the chips have become more specialized over time. So I would not recommend trying to mine at home on your laptop. You really need to
I'm not saying I want to mine, but it is interesting because I had someone, I knew some people in the past that all they did was mine Bitcoin, and they just like devoted their computer. They got new computers just for mining, and it wasn't a commercial operation. It was just them doing it for themselves. And this was 7 or 8 years ago now. So
Right.
I don't know how much it's advanced now. Someone actually just super chatted. Normally I read super chats at the end, but I saw this, and this is a really good question. This is from the R Heretic. It says, what does Robert have to say about the fact that China mines the most Bitcoin, and couldn't they arguably monopolize this once it goes big? That is a really good question. What's stopping China from just mining all the Bitcoin and then controlling it?
Right. So, as in most spheres of tech, China is ahead of us. They do. Last I checked, there's about 60% of the hash rate, which is the global Bitcoin mining network output. 60% of that is roughly generated from China.
Wow.
But that amount is decentralizing, right? As other markets come online, it's becoming less concentrated in China. But the other thing to remember is that China is not one homogenous entity, and China mining is not under control of the CCP. These are independent entrepreneurs mining. And even if you controlled 60+% of the hash rate, you're still incentivized to be honest in Bitcoin. Like the best and this is the brilliance behind it, is that the game theory is structured as such that even if you control an outsized share of the hash rate, you're still incentivized to comply with the rules and just mine Bitcoin. That's the best economic strategy for you. And I would say that the threat is a little bit overblown, because it's not, you can't just say 60% of the mining's in China, so China controls it. That's not how it works.
Right.
Each independent operator controls their operation, right? And there are tens of thousands of these all over China. And if a law is passed or someone tries to stamp down on it, which China has, by the way, they've taken exchanges offline. There were rumors they were going to outlaw Bitcoin for some time, but they've just been unable to do it. And some of their efforts actually backfired. When they took exchanges offline, it reduced the selling pressure on Bitcoin because no one had a place to liquidate their Bitcoin, which actually increased its price. So I would say that at this point, with Bitcoin at over $200 billion in market cap, networks tend to just win out after this point. And again, money being this single purpose technology we use for moving value across time and space, there tends to be one winner. So for the same quantifiable reasons we have one gold, we're only likely to have one digital gold.
Which would be Bitcoin. How many Bitcoin are in the world right now?
I believe 18.5 million have been mined so far.
So it's almost to the max.
Yeah, so it asymptotically gets less and less every year. And to give you an idea of that, this year we're producing about 300,000 Bitcoin globally. So the total mining output's about 300,000 per year. By the year 2100, that number will be 0.3 Bitcoin per year. So it's going to collapse 8 orders of magnitude, which is back to the halving. Every 4 years, it cuts in half. So we have this exponential decay of the money supply, which drives its scarcity in the marketplace.
Right, and it'll just get more and more valuable as well.
Yeah. When you come to see it from that standpoint, it's really hard to identify a chink in the armor, so to speak. It's like, if you can't turn Bitcoin off and its scarcity just keeps escalating while the scarcity of all other monies gets continually compromised through inflation, how does it not keep absorbing value from these compromised currencies?
Yeah.
And that's the revelation a lot of people have had.
Well, I mean, as we move forward into the future of society, internet is a natural progression of it. Like, we are integrating ourselves into the internet in more ways than ever. I mean, we're gaming, we're hanging out with our friends via games. Like, I don't live near any of my friends, and yet I hang out with them all the time and feels like I'm right next to them over the internet, and then think space, we're going to be communicating through the interwebs. And of course, I'm sure the technology is going to get crazier and crazier in that sense. And, so it makes sense that we're going to have this, crypto take over. I mean, it feels like there's going to reach a max though. And, what is that going to mean for society? Like, are we going to just switch over to it? Are we going to have like little physical Bitcoin wallets so we just walk around and pay, like a little bit of a transaction? But then, of course, if the world does go to crap, then it's not like I can buy, a burger or a meal somewhere with Bitcoin if the computers all get shot. I mean, I don't think that's going to be the case, but some people do believe that.
Yeah. There's a great book that was written in the late 90s called The Sovereign Individual. It's very popular in Bitcoin circles, but not widely known besides that. But it made a number of predictions that proved to be very prescient, and I think it's the best guidepost for the world we're moving into. One thing it predicted, again, written in 1997, it predicted the rise of narrowcasting being disruptive to broadcasting.
What is that? What is that narrowcasting?
Type media.
So you cut out a little bit. Start over again. What is narrowcasting?
Sorry about that. So what they referred to in the book as narrowcasting was a disruptor to broadcasting. So I think what we call today social media was what they identified as narrowcasting. It was everyone would become a producer and a consumer of media versus just a consumer, right?
Okay.
So that thesis, I think, is playing out pretty well. They also predicted the rise of anonymous digital cash, which we'd call Bitcoin. Yeah. Bitcoin. And they said that when this happened, people would realize that you could store capital in cyberspace in a place that couldn't be attacked or taxed. And when people started to do that, the nation state would lose its primary funding mechanism, which is taxation and inflation, right?
Right.
So if they can't steal money from you via taxation and inflation, both of which are theft, by the way, because you don't negotiate your tax rate. You're told what your tax rate is. It's a unilateral decree, which makes it theft, right? It's not negotiated. It's not a market rate.
Yeah.
Once nations are unable to steal from you via taxation and inflation, the nation would shrink a lot. So they actually predicted the downfall, roughly, of the nation state, and that government would become once again a much more localized affair, and the overblown federal government and politics charade that we see today would become much less relevant. It's really interesting. They analogized it to the fall of chivalry 500 years ago. There was for hundreds of years, people thought chivalry was this code of honor and ethics and whatever, but very suddenly it collapsed, right? Once the church started to lose power, chivalry kind of lost its power.
Yeah. The name of that book again, that you're talking about here?
It's The Sovereign Individual.
The Sovereign Individual. Interesting.
Yeah, published in 97. But I would say that the general theme is that these technologies give us great power, clearly, right? We can now sort of bend time and space and increase our productivity and do all these interesting things.
Yeah.
But with that power comes great responsibility, right? Like if you choose to hold your savings in Bitcoin, there's no one you can call if you lose your private key. Your private key is the access point to your Bitcoin. If you lose that information, you're done. You can't call someone to fix your password for you, right?
Okay.
So I think we are moving into this world where we're going to have much greater autonomy and power and independence.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is just a great deal more of responsibility. So a lot of the functions that the state provides today, I think, are going to become privatized. You'll probably see private security forces, right? As police are not as well funded. You're going to see likely free private cities start to emerge. So when we saw the Soviet Union collapse, right, it fragmented into 24 countries.
Yeah.
We'll probably see something like that play out as well. And the theme is just be ready to take care of yourself, right? We can't always depend on society to send us Postmates and to send the cops to our house when we need them and to, be able to jump on a plane and go anywhere in the world. Like you really have to have a contingency plan in place because I think things are going to get better, but there's a transition that's inherently confusing and dangerous for a lot of people.
Yeah. You mentioned something there. If you lose your key, you're kind of screwed. And I've always actually been curious because I know that there's a physical like wallet you can get that you can store your Bitcoin on. If you lose it, what happens to that Bitcoin? Does it just float on forever with no owner, or does it get reallocated somehow? Because what if there's 21 million Bitcoin max? What if someone has a million Bitcoin? I know that's a crazy number, but let's just throw it out there: 1 million Bitcoin, and their hard drive that has the Bitcoin gets tossed into the ocean and gets destroyed. What happens to that Bitcoin? I'm curious.
There is actually a guy that has 1 million Bitcoin, and it's
really
Satoshi. Satoshi has 1 million Bitcoin,
okay.
Which has been pieced together from some mining analysis, but it's estimated that he has about 1 million Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin has never moved. So it's out there, but it's never been transacted. And if you have Bitcoin on a hard wallet or a cold wallet and you lose the cold wallet, hopefully you backed up your seed phrase or your private key, which that is the information that can be used to redeem. You can restore your wallet and redeem your Bitcoin at any time. But if you lose that information, then your Bitcoin is gone. And when your Bitcoin is gone, it is just like you said, it would just sit there forever, unmoved. No one could access it. No one could turn it. But what this also does economically, it's like making a contribution to every other Bitcoin holder in the world.
Right.
Because you've made it that much more scarce.
I see.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, the card game, right?
So there's this guy. He goes by Power Nine. He's got a shop in Wisconsin, and he would carry. Do you know what the Power Nine are in
I don't.
Magic? So the Power Nine were nine cards that were so powerful that if you had those cards, you pretty much won. The Black Lotus is like the most famous Magic card, the Black Lotus, and he had a binder filled with Black Lotuses, and he famously took out a Black Lotus, and you see this Black Lotus, and he ripped it up in front of everybody, straight up ripped it up and dropped it on the table, and everyone's like, "Oh!" And he picks up the binder and he said, "I just made this more valuable." And then he walked off the stage, and that's what it makes me think of, because they're so scarce, but they're worth so much that taking one out of the equation makes the rest worth just that much more. And he had enough of them that then he actually gained value by ripping one up.
And the reverse is also true for looking at the US dollar, right?
Right.
They keep making more and more of them. So they're less rare, therefore they're
Yep.
less valuable, therefore
Just
prices
print
are
money.
higher.
Just
Right.
print money. It fixes everything, right? Just give
Right.
everybody money. Keep printing it. Duh.
That's right.
Every time I hear that, I almost get a headache because they have no idea what it means, what money is, and it goes
Right.
back to the original question: what is money?
Right.
People nowadays, especially the younger generations. I'm in my mid-30s, so I feel like I've kind of starting to get a standing about economics. I could see how important, having a general knowledge of economics is. Like, we really need to understand what economics is, to get taught what taxes are, and they don't. Now I understand. This conversation right here proves it even more to me why taxes aren't taught in schools. They don't want you to know about it. They want you to just
Absolutely right.
get tossed into adult life, knowing that that's just a certainty, that death, and taxes. Those are the certain things we have to deal with, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And to the earlier point, so you're not going to get it in mainstream education, but now with the internet, right, it's a treasure trove of resources if you know where to
yeah,
look.
true.
And so one book I would point people to, you don't need any understanding of economics for this. There's a book called What Has Government Done to Our Money by Rothbard. And that's available as a free PDF on Mises.org, which is an Austrian economics website. And I think it's maybe a 30-page read, maybe 50 pages.
Okay.
But he comes at it from first principles, and explains to you very clearly what government has done to our money. And that's what, there's a quote out there in Bitcoin that Bitcoin's not about getting your money out of the country. Bitcoin's about getting your country out of your money.
Here's yeah, it's right here. You can easily go see it. I just wanted to pop that up for people to check it out.
That's an excellent first step down the rabbit hole.
Interesting. Wow. Well, I mean, I definitely feel like I have a much better understanding. I mean, we've only been going for an hour, and it's surprisingly much easier to understand. I mean, you approach it in a different sense. Like you said in the beginning, you can't just start explaining what blockchains are and all, the different, I don't remember all the words you chose, but when someone who understands Bitcoin already, they give you all this technological side of it. And it's like, you really have to understand money first, like the economics of what it is. So that does, I do see it. I see what it is. It is a new standard. Essentially, it's not the gold standard anymore. It's the Bitcoin standard. It's the internet. It is a new age standard, right? I mean, essentially. What do you think the effects on society are going to be?
Yeah, the common moniker for Bitcoin in that sense is the internet of money, right? Again, it's just what the internet did to media, Bitcoin is doing to money, right? Or to the financial system.
Yep.
And one of the major implications, and this is when we transition into where I consider Bitcoin to be a humanitarian movement, actually, is it's bad enough that we're being stolen from via taxation and surreptitiously through inflation. But it's even worse when we stop to consider how those proceeds are being spent.
Good point.
The value that's being stolen from us. And war is the most expensive activity in human history, flat out, right? You have to mobilize a lot of people, produce a lot of weapons and capital, ship them a long distance, and then you go and lay waste to people and capital. So not only is it expensive to mobilize, but you're also using it to destroy people and capital, which is the most anti-economic thing we could do, right? It destroys trust, it destroys cooperation, it destroys our productivity, and it destroys our lives and livelihood. And it's awful, right? In every sense of the word. It destroys culture, etc.
Yeah, and war.
Central banking was established as a mechanism to fund warfare. Wow. And Ron Paul has a famous quote that in the 20th century, he said, "It's no coincidence that the century of central banking, which was the 20th century, and the century of total war were in the same century."
Hand in hand.
Right? The per capita death in warfare quadrupled in the 20th century. Wow. Because we implemented the Fed in 1913 and used it as a apparatus of theft. So instead of having to send a citizen a bill at the end of the year and say, "Hey, you owe us $20,000 for the war in Iraq," they just print money. It's just done invisibly, right? So citizens never have, again, that visible aspect of price change, right? Price being the price of the taxes you're paying to live in a country. When they don't see that, politicians and bureaucrats are able to steal invisibly to fund perpetual warfare. So World War I and World War II, the reason they were so broad and so destructive is because the nations fighting could keep funding them. They didn't run into any budgetary constraints because they could keep printing money until either you win or your currency hyperinflates, right? So in the case of the United States, we won, but Weimar Germany inflated. They had hyperinflation. When you have a money that can't be compromised and can't be inflated, countries are forced to cut deals. Like you go to war for a little while, as soon as your budget gets tapped out, you're forced to cut a deal. You got to sign a treaty or something. You can't keep waging perpetual warfare because you don't have a printing press to finance it.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to say that Bitcoin is disruptive to gold, it's disruptive to government, and it's disruptive to global warfare. And that's why I think it's such a big deal.
I mean, all those things sound pretty good. Like, I don't want the world to be at war. You know, I don't feel like we need big government. You know, I feel like we the people, that's what America's supposed to be about. You know, I don't want to be sending troops off to die. Like, that's why, you know, the president at the time, he's trying to end warfare and stop being the world police. And I think it's a move in the right direction, you know, and not to get political, you know, and keep it about Bitcoin, but, you know, it feels like it feels like that machine, not necessarily the war machine, but like the whole establishment machine has just been running on auto mode and getting worse and worse and worse over the years. And because of the internet, the media bubble has been popped. Now, because of Bitcoin and what my understanding of it now is starting to pop that bubble. So of course it's being, you know, they don't want this to happen. They don't want, everything's got to be becoming restructured almost. And it's a forcing it to be restructured towards, you know, Bitcoin and the internet. It's a really interesting time.
Yeah. And I think to get back to your question a little bit about what does the world look like? Yeah, I think we'll just wake up from this. It's almost a hallucination that we have a popularity contest going on between Trump and Biden to decide who gets to steal from us and set what rate they want to steal from us to fund their activities.
Right.
Like, why do we have one ape to rule 300 million? Does that make any sense at all? Or is this just an outdated system that's had enough inertia to carry itself into the 21st century?
I think the latter.
Yeah, but now we don't need, those institutions are not necessary to mobilize and organize human action at scale, right? Again, a lot of that power through software has been reallocated to the individual.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a world of, and to get back to the sovereign individual, they consider a world going from 200 nation states to something with like 20,000. Now, this may take 500 years. Like, this is a long change.
Yeah.
But that's the way we're going. I think these bloated, inefficient, federalized, centralized governments that can only stay relevant because they are a monopolist, right?
Yeah.
They can steal by printing money, and they have no accountability to their citizens whatsoever. That you move towards a free market competition model where their citizens are their customers. They have to listen to their preferences. They have to incorporate their feedback. Otherwise, those customers or citizens will go elsewhere. They take their business elsewhere.
Yeah.
And for a sense of this, the analogy I like to give is, think of how you're treated at the DMV versus how you're treated at the Apple Store. That's a unfree market at the DMV, right? They've got the monopoly on licenses and such, versus Apple has to compete to earn your loyalty and such.
Yeah.
Moving towards a freer market world.
Bringing it back.
Yeah.
All right. Robert, thank you so much for joining me, by the way. This has been a fantastic conversation. I just want to say that before we jump into some super chats, see a bunch of super chats coming up. So we're going to get into that. But thank you for coming in and spending some time with me explaining cryptocurrency in the crypto world.
Yeah, man. Thank you. And thank you to Bitcoin Twitter, because they're the ones that made this happen. You know, I saw you tweet that out, and a few people sent it to me and told me I should reach out. And nice. Thank you for having me on.
Well, my pleasure. And for those who did tag Robert to come on the show, thank you very much, because this has been very enlightening. So let's get into it. We got some for Mark Robertshaw. Just did, oh my gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 super chats in a row. It's like you were live chatting through our conversation. So I'll read these here. Mark says, bottle caps are currency if you know where. I don't know if you ever heard of Fallout, but that's a Fallout reference.
Is that the first-person shooter game?
Yes, yeah, Fallout. The Fallout series, bottle caps are the money.
I only know of it. I haven't had the enjoyment of playing it.
It's a good game. It's a good game. Yeah. Mark Robertshaw again says, what happens to currency when the means of production is all automated, as well as the maintenance no longer a need for humans to make anything? It's a good question.
So the question is, when the means of production are all automated, what happens to currency?
Well, because humans at the moment both run their machines to maintain it, right, as well. So, and that is like, so the production of Bitcoin is also based on that maintenance, because it kind of goes hand in hand from what I gathered, right? So I guess the question is, you know, there's going to be a point where there's 21 million Bitcoin. It's reached its limit. You know, I guess it's up to you to really understand or take that, you know, what you would think that question is.
Yeah. So I got two things from it, so I'll answer each one. First is, the current model for Bitcoin is that every 10 minutes a new block is sealed, and whatever miner successfully seals that block is rewarded Bitcoin. But that's called the block subsidy. So each block is being subsidized by new Bitcoin. That subsidy is contracting every 4 years as Bitcoin's supply rate decreases. Okay. So what's being used to incentivize miners instead is there's an increase in the transaction fee market. So they're being compensated less by newly issued Bitcoin and more by transaction fees. So that is the long-term security model for Bitcoin. Such in the year 2140, the last Bitcoin is mined, all of the security in the mining network would be receiving revenue in the form of transaction fees instead of new Bitcoin, because there is no more new Bitcoin, right? So that's one answer to what I gathered. And the other part of the question was, we're moving into a world where things are more automated, right? It's more automated. So in terms of what happens to a money there, we have to remember that the purpose of the world economy is to accomplish greater results with less effort. So every time we can introduce something that automates a function that a person would have to do, we've increased wealth. Because all of a sudden, we can satisfy that want without having to sacrifice human time to do it, right? Right now, we're having a video chat. I don't know where you're at, but we're far apart. we're able to jump on here and talk really quick. If we didn't have the internet and these laptops, we'd have to fly to each other, right? Spend a bunch of money and time. If we didn't have planes, we'd have to take a wagon. Like, as innovation declines, more and more time is necessary to accomplish your wants, right?
Correct.
So in that world, where, say, we're radically automating most production, the productive of most wealth and capital, prices decline precipitously.
Yeah.
Right? Because things are just cheaper and cheaper. And that's the world we should be living in, by the way. If we're on a gold standard or we're on a Bitcoin standard, prices go down every year as we get smarter and better at making things. But the world we're currently living in, prices go up every year. And that increase in prices is a function of government theft. And that's the indoctrination we've been put under, is that, oh, it's just the natural order of things. You need prices to go up for an economy to be healthy. But it's a flat out piece of propaganda. It's a lie.
Yeah, I see that.
And
where's Ian when you need him? This is I actually have seen a few people in chat that you're like a grown up, more wise Ian, which is funny because Ian is someone who is in the house. He's been on my show before. He's very he actually talks about basically what we've talked about, open source, free software. Being a lot of the answers to a lot of the issues. He would have loved this conversation. Honestly, I'm sure he's gonna be a little jealous. Just like, oh man, this is exactly what I've been trying to talk about. So it's kind of funny. But let's keep moving. We don't have that much more time. So Mark, again, we're moving through Mark Robertshaw's super chats here. It says pensioners get robbed by government all the time. Yep. Mark again says, would you stash hard drives with Bitcoin in walls? Interesting.
So with Bitcoin, the custody solutions become very customizable and unique. You don't actually need physical custody for Bitcoin.
Okay.
You can even memorize your private key, and you can go across a border with $1 billion on your brain, right? You can encode it in a published piece of writing.
Okay.
Like, it's published into a newspaper, but because no one knows how to decrypt your key from that message, it's out there forever. So you basically backed it up permanently. You can write it down on a piece of paper. You can put it in a song. You can chop the keys into little bits and give it to a few of your trusted people. You could put it on a hard drive and put it in a wall. But it's the proper custody solutions tend to be more informational than physical.
All right. Well, there you go, Mark. Again, he says, a more evolved Ian he is, I think. Well, there you go. I didn't even know that he was about to say that. That's funny. Mark again says, is the like button currency? Yes, it is currency, and you should smash the like button. Robert, let me hear you say it. Smash the like button.
Smash the like button.
Oh, yes. Smash it.
And attention is currency, by the way. That's human time, right? And money is a reflection of human time.
I have people here watching us right now. We have captivated their time. So that is currency. Very cool.
That's right.
Mark says sponsored by Bitcoin and sponsored by Apple. We are not sponsored by anyone. Just adding that out also. Mr. Trainer Guy says Biden 2020 make kids scared again. Biden scares me. Mark says diamonds are a good example of artificial value. Okay. Well, I mean, but they're scarce. So we've realized that, it is and diamonds are used for things, diamond tipped drills, diamond stuff, because they're great for cutting tools. So they do have some. I feel like diamonds have more worth than gold in some sense because they're used. Although, isn't gold used in certain computer parts as well? I'm not really sure.
That's correct. So the delineation is between industrial use, which would be a diamond using to cut or make things or as a component, or gold is in electronics or dental stuff, versus a monetary premium. And the monetary premium of gold is higher than diamonds because gold has a greater scarcity profile. And the audience member is correct. The scarcity profile of diamonds is largely manipulated. And there's a lot of information out there, but if you look at, I think, De Beers Corp, they hold a lot of the supply and they release it into the market slowly to try and keep its price high, essentially.
I see.
But the Bitcoin in that lens, you could consider as something that's pure monetary premium, right? There's no industrial use for Bitcoin other than money. So
Okay.
in a way, it's kind of like the most perfect monetary technology we've ever had.
Awesome. Exploding Prinny says, any idea if Satoshi is still around or who made the large block move recently?
I'm not sure which large block move he's referring to. To my knowledge, Satoshi Stash still has not moved. And no, my best guess at who Satoshi is would be a collaboration between Hal Finney and Nick Szabo, but I don't even know if that's likely.
Okay. Josh and Jesus says, what's his opinion on Dogecoin or Dogecoin, depending on your pronunciation, DOGE coin, as far as where it will be 10 years from now?
Again, Bitcoin, much more like the internet itself, something that I think has a lot of staying power and market value as we move forward. Everything else, I tell people that it's liquid venture capital subjected to little, if any, due diligence. So most of it will go to zero. Maybe 1 or 2% succeed meaningfully. But even if they succeed outrageously, it's still competing for a smaller market than what Bitcoin is competing for. Bitcoin's competing for global money. That's $100 trillion plus market.
Yeah.
Everything else combined, all the markets this technology is being used to address, is less than 20 trillion. So even if one won that entire market, it would be 1/5 the size of Bitcoin.
Right on. Mark Robershaw again says, if the sun went supernova, Bitcoin will be gone. He's got a point. He's got a point. So would we.
It's all over. Yeah. It's all over.
The R Heretic says, what does Robert have to say? This is the China question that we actually established already. Mark Robershaw with another group of super chats. Bitcoin destroyed the GPU supply. That I do believe. I've been trying to get a hold of a 3080 and since they came out, and it's just nearly impossible. So I settled actually for a X700 or a 5700 XT, which I'm actually really happy with. So again, says sponsored by the CCP. Not true. We are not. Doors plus no fuss. Adam is an internet worshipping sellout. Whoa, come on, Mark. What are you talking about? I just know the internet is part of our society now. We can't change that. You got to understand. Mark says he even sounds like Ian. Well, you have actually touched light on a lot of the things Ian has been trying to talk about. That's why I said he would have loved to be on this episode with us.
I should probably mention my superpower here.
Yeah.
I always look familiar to everyone. I don't know why. Everywhere I go, people are like, "Oh, you're like my Joe's friend," and
right on.
I don't know how I got that, but yeah,
that's not a bad. You also disappear then as well.
I would assume, but
right,
yeah.
And then Mark, one last one says, chivalry became the neckbeards, bro. Well, I don't know about that, but the R Heretic again just sent a super chat. Appreciate that. Selly says, what happens if nobody wants to trade away their Bitcoin because no more will ever be created? The value will go up. Why would you ever trade it anyway? Or why would you want to trade it away?
It sounds like a man that's starting to see the value proposition of Bitcoin. There's actually a mega incentive to just hold it and not trade it. At some point, if it did outcompete in the market for money, you would have a lot of incentives to then spend some of it at least, or borrow against it to realize some of the gains. Right. Because if Bitcoin's 10,000 a day, if it outcompetes just gold, it's around 500,000 per coin. If it outcompetes global money, you're talking about something like 5 million per coin. Yeah. So and at some point, the dollar value loses relevance.
Yeah.
The U.S. dollar would actually hyperinflate, right?
Okay. And also eventually, if you have enough Bitcoin and you don't have any other money, you're gonna have to buy with something, right? So you'll eventually end up with needing to buy some food or buy whatever you need, and that'll be the end. All right, so we don't have too much time. I want to get to all these super chats. Fractal says that's why a lot of so-called shady coins do a thing called burning, where they are purposefully burnt the coin so they can increase the value. Okay, interesting. Oh, and I guess that's non-Bitcoin, like smaller, like the competitors or whatnot.
Yeah, another way to think about the competitors or the altcoins is that they're
Okay.
all companies, they're organizations, so they're
Yeah.
politicized, and some of the uh, political owners or the governors of the system will choose to burn coin to try and incentivize holders. But again, it's Bitcoin being this totally apolitical money
Yeah.
that's perfected all of its properties makes it fundamentally different than all of the altcoins.
Right. All right. Ethan says, I haven't confirmed this, but I read from a pretty reputable source that 22% of all US dollars ever printed was printed this year. Think about that. That is incredible.
That is
And
accurate.
and frightening. Is it accurate? So you've heard this too.
This is accurate. And if we
Scary.
stock to flow ratio, which is how you quantify the scarcity,
Yeah.
is just the inverse of the inflation rate. So 1 over 22% means the
Wow.
US dollar has a stock to flow ratio of 4.5 this year. Gold has 55, Bitcoin has 55. Bitcoin doubles every 4 years. So
Wow.
you need to choose your store value wisely.
Mark Robertshaw says, "Call me your sugar daddy." Thank you, Mark. You're very consistent with your super chatting and all of my episodes, and I really do appreciate you. Eastside Tony says, "You have a popularity contest going on between Trump and Biden to decide who gets to steal from us and set at what rate they get to steal from us to fund their activities." End quote by Robert Breedlove. Very nice quote. You've been quoted.
Thank you.
Ethan Barron says, "What happens to cryptology and blockchain when a rogue nation or even an everyday consumer gets access to quantum computing?" That's from Rusty, probably from my Discord.
So quantum computing, that's a whole rabbit hole in unto itself. But typically, it's kind of a cat and mouse game. So if we cracked the SHA 256 mining algorithm via quantum computing, typically there would be kind of a quantum resistant upgrade put in place. But one interesting thing about quantum computing is that the coins that have never moved, that people have lost their keys to, or the Satoshi stash, for instance, quantum computing may actually give the person who makes that breakthrough, person or institution, access to those coins.
Oh,
so actually, and I'm not 100% sure on that, and there's a lot to be sorted out as the specifics, but if that is the case, then there's a giant financial incentive to crack quantum computing. It wouldn't break Bitcoin, but it would give you a ton of Bitcoin.
Right. Matches Burn says, Ian says, "What if Bitcoin is the souls of dead money?" That does sound like something Ian would say. Chuck Morris says, "Invest in property with mineral rights. Hard assets are a permanent thing. The algorithm is a terminal point." Good point. I'm just going to, we only have like 4 or 5 left. I'm just going to read these out. BM says, "Describe what you think some likely scenarios would be for Bitcoin after a massive coronal mass ejection like the Carrington event." Adam, you're great. Thank you very much. I think we actually did cover that a little bit, kind of like a global EMP event. We talked about that earlier. The R Heretic, thank you for that super chat. Mark Robertshaw again says, "Bitcoin or Tesla stocks?" I'm going to go with Bitcoin. What about you? I'm assuming Bitcoin.
I'm irresponsibly long Bitcoin, yes.
Yeah, all right. Let's see. BM again says, "Explain how you think cryptocurrency community will adapt to quantum computing." Great. You just kind of, touched on it a little bit, but unfortunately we don't have time. Would love to delve more. As you said, it's like a whole nother rabbit hole. We don't have time to even get into that. Ryan Keller says, "Best way to get started in Bitcoin." That's something I would like answered. What would you say? Where would you send people to get into it?
As I got started on my journey was actually investing into it. And I think where your money goes, your mind does follow, right? You really start to think about where your money is. So I would say just buy a little and hold it and then invest in the education. There's a treasure trove of resources out there. DM me on Twitter. I can point you the right direction or try to.
I actually have you can check out his information in the description below. It's his Twitter handle is right there. You can click on it and have access to some more. Ernest, thank you for the super chat. Micah says, "I wonder how much U.S. currency has been lost in couch cushions, washing machines, dryers, or even house fires." It's a good question. Probably not much compared to the amount printed, especially this year, 22% more. My goodness. Jeremy says, "Can I borrow $1?" No, you can't, but I will definitely take your dollars. Thank you so much. And that is all the time we have today on Adamcast. Thank you all for joining me. And Robert, of course, thank you very much for joining and giving me your expertise. It's been enlightening, to say the least. Where
Thank you,
can
Adam.
people see your stuff, follow you? Why don't you, I'll give you the camera and you can, give it your all.
Sure thing. So I'm on Twitter at Breedlove22. That's my last name, BREEDLOVE 22. You can also find most of my writings on Medium. And you can also check us out on our website, parallaxdigital.io, PARALLAX digital.io. And then we recently launched a YouTube channel. I think it's under Breedlove22, or maybe Robert Breedlove22 is the YouTube channel, which is just a lot of snippets of my media appearances talking about Bitcoin, macroeconomics, philosophy, things like that.
Right on. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful night, and I will see you tomorrow, same time, 6:30 p.m. here on Adamcast IRL. And you can also catch me later on tonight on my Twitch channel. I go live after the Timcast IRL show ends, usually around 10 o'clock. So I'll see you then, and thank you all for joining us on Adamcast IRL.